Hey, I'm Matt, one of the developers at Bidlo, and today we'll be talking about the context wars, kind of this hidden war that's going on behind the scenes. So I'm sure everyone's seen the news about GPT 5.6 being withheld from the general public, just like Mythos and Fable was, after it was released. We are seeing a general slowdown in the speed at which frontier models are being released to the general public. Now, this might change as more and more, distilled versions of these models make their way through the open source community. However, the slowdown has kind of shifted the focus to another war that's going on, which is the context war. So the first kind of example of this is last 2 weeks ago at this point, Apple did their big developer conference where they're announcing kind of all the new upcoming features. And the big focus of that conference was Siri, or the next iteration of Siri. And they are now partnering with Google, so a lot of the Gemini models will be underpinning the macOS and iOS operating systems. But their big kind of push into this space isn't to make Siri the absolute frontier, cutting-edge model. It's to give it all the context it needs to do what you want it to do. So, it understands, how you talk to your grandmother. It understands, your current, weekly schedule. It understands your preferences in terms of, shopping or app usage or things like that. So that when you do ask it to do something, its implementation is deeply personalized based on all the context that the Apple operating system or the Apple ecosystem is making available to that model. Now we can take it a step further. This last week, Claude was introduced as a tag in Slack. Now, I know a lot of people in our industry use Teams, but Slack is just kind of the version of Teams used by developers. It is a wonderful platform. We really like that platform. And Anthropic has pushed to kind of make that the user interface of the future for these models. So when you bring Claude into any of your chats, any of your teams, if we're using that analogy, you're essentially giving that Claude bot access to all of your unstructured context, all of the conversation that goes on in that thread. And as you think about it, your organization is broken up into a lot of these threads. You'll have a thread specifically for, your estimating team, or you might have a private conversation amongst a smaller subset of your estimating team. All of that is context that has been kind of scoped to a very specific task or a very specific group. And giving Claude access to those specific bubbles makes that bot more aware of how it should act when you tell it to do things, or aware of what's going on when you ask it to do things. So this is just another example of one of these frontier labs, Anthropic in this case, pursuing the context battle. The last implementation of this that I want to talk about is Codex, which is, Claude Code was kind of Anthropic's big foray into a popular mainstream application. Codex is OpenAI's kind of version of that. And while Anthropic is now focusing on the conversation part of context with, its integration into Slack, Codex is more focusing on the file implementation. So Codex, you load on your computer, you tell it to get started on doing something, and it's able to pull out, all of the information within that environment through all the files, all the documentation, anything like that. Now, OpenAI put out a really interesting article that showed Codex adoption over the last couple months has skyrocketed, really since 5.5 came out. The reason it has skyrocketed, and when I say skyrocketed, I'm not talking about within the developer community. I'm talking about within all the other industries. I'm talking about the legal community, the medical community, all these other very file-focused communities that have been using apps like ChatGPT, but not to the same level with all the loops and the context awareness and all of the long-running tasks that developers have been using through tools like Codex. So, Anthropic has been focusing on the kind of conversational tone of Codex, and that's where they see this going. Apple has been focused on the ecosystem tone of Codex, so that's where they are going. And then OpenAI has been focusing on kind of the file, the ability to map out a lot of unstructured data to get particular tasks done. That's their kind of version of context. Now, we think all of these are to some degree right, depending on the workflow. So at Bidlo, the way we are approaching this is we think of our product as a tool for turning your market into context. So when you either launch any sort of application or any sort of conversation or any sort of agent through Bidlo, it instantly has access to all of the other things that are going on outside of the project you are looking at. So if you want to know bid pricing, if you want to know recommended vendors, it is aware of all that additional context in your market that is necessary to answer such a specific question on this project. Now, we think this is wonderful to do within Bidlo, but we're also we also make that available to any of the agents you already use. So if your team is a Codex user or a Claude user, or maybe you built your own harnesses internally, we think that is fantastic. And all of the data that we've turned into market-aware context is available directly to that agent through MCP, APIs, or any of the other ways you'd like to integrate. So that's kind of the context war in a nutshell. A lot of that is going on, I think, under the radar, under the mainstream media's radar. So we'd say pay attention to that. I think this is going to become a very big topic over the next couple months.